But first, tell us about what is Revive Thoughts Studio. How did you start it out? What
Sure.
drove the passion to lend your voice to the voiceless?
Sure. So, and if you are listening thinking, oh, so, Troy speaks all the sermons, don't worry. My voice doesn't speak all the sermons. So you're not just getting this nasal thing the whole way through. You get lovely voices like Patrick and many others who bring their voices to Revive Thoughts. However, I will be honest, I think I can speak like a lot of people, maybe even more so. I thought I knew church history very well. I went to Bible college, took 4 years. Church history is a required course. I thought I understand church history. The apostles leave Jerusalem, Roman Empire falls, Martin Luther's nailing some stuff, Puritans come to America, Charles Spurgeon preaches, bada bing, bada boom, right? Like that was how but I would, if you had asked me, I'd be like, of course I know history. And I was a big history nerd. I loved history. I've always loved history. So I would have thought I knew church history. The more I study church history, the more I realize, oh my gosh, not only do I not know church history, I don't even know real history because so much of our real history is being led, especially in the West, by the church and by Christians. And if you try to understand history, if you try to understand the founding of America, if you try to understand the Revolutionary War, if you try to understand the 1800s and the 1900s, but you take away the church, you cannot understand all the things that are happening very well at all. And yet that's exactly what history does. You go to school, you grow up, you learn history. And then if you're lucky, you learn church history almost as a side subject. You don't realize the church has been leading so much of history for so long. And a good way to apply that would be try to understand the Roe versus Wade decision if you didn't understand that the church has been fighting like mad to get Roe versus Wade overturned for the last 50 years. 100 years from now, in the history books, it'll be Roe versus Wade was overturned. And it might say Christian nationalist extremists, caused that to occur. But it will almost nothing will be talked about how for 50 years the church was deeply ingrained into its communities and people will not understand how that came about. And if you take that same application and apply it to the rest of history, you start to realize just how little you understood what was going on for so much of history. Church history leads so much, and yet, like you said, Patrick, if theology is the king, down below is apologetics, and I think apologetics, is a very good subject to study, and then way down at the bottom is going to be church history, and yet we've got that. I don't want to say we should put church history on top or even apologetics on top. I'm saying those three should be studied concurrently and together. They help you understand each other, and a lot of times church history is looked at as basically like, okay, if I need to prove my theology, where can I go to in the 1700s or 1800s to prove some theological point? This makes a lot of sense when you remember that most of the people writing church history today are seminarians or they're professors, right? Like they go to these places, schools of theology, and then they turn around and, students are required to go and learn in the church history course. And so they want to know theology, but they're getting this church history on the side. And again, that's just not the best way to teach it. Imagine if, in the same way you had to teach law, but a bunch of seminarians were teaching it. How would seminarians teach law? Well, they would have a huge emphasis on how they could pull theology out of that law, right? But are they the best people to teach law? Are they the best people to make lawyers? Maybe not so much. At least they need to work with the best people. But a lot of times history is subservient. It only exists to prove the theological points of the theology professors. And I think we've got to get away from that and get to this point, because the part about church history that's funny is it breaks down all the theology points. Is no matter what, if you're a Calvinist, you're going to find some really great Arminians in church history. If you're an Arminian, you're going to find some great Calvinists in church history. It'd be really nice if everyone was in your camp in church history. Like, wouldn't that be great if all the good guys were in your camp and all the bad guys weren't? But that's just not the way God worked at all. He used people from different camps, and even at times, different camps were better than they were. And regardless of how we feel about it, 600 to 700 years ago, all the Christians, for the most part, were Catholic, and we can't really do anything about that. As much as we'd like them to be, Protestant, the Protestants didn't exist back then, so that's where we found the Christians, except for in Ethiopia and stuff like that. So the point being, I have this huge passion for church history, but I started out in the same place as most people, which is I thought I knew it. I didn't really care that much about it. I got a book of sermons, started reading through it, realized these would be really cool if someone recorded them, realized that all the stuff in them were outside copyright, so anybody could do what they wanted with them. And Joel and I it took 1.5 years to plan out Revive Thoughts, launched it. When we explained it to everybody and said, no, it's old sermons, but you get to listen to them and we'll tell you the backstory. Nobody got it. It took so long to get those first 10 sermons recorded so we could release with episodes. But ever since then, we've asked volunteers who listen to come in and speak the sermons. And the Lord has provided us with so many wonderful people like Patrick who have come on, who've spoken and brought these sermons to life throughout the years and kept the show going now well over 3 years. And the only thing wrong with what Patrick said earlier was that our stats are kind of old because we're actually at 500,000 downloads across the studio now.
Yeah.
So we've been growing and growing, and we feel quite blessed by how much God has used these.
Great. Yeah, lot to say there. We're going to cover some of what you talked about a little bit more in depth as we go on. But I think too, just to kind of build off that, because this is my show too, and I can add to that comment. That I think a good majority of us probably only have the history that we went through with school, and we we might have covered some world history, but it was always a touchstone back to America, and it was America of learn it through the sacraments of these presidents or these wars, and those are kind of the begin and end. So when you think about splitting up American history, it's always before and after Reconstruction, and that's the dividing line between as where we're at right now with that. But then if you read outside of that, you go, here's all these books that the school didn't want you to know, or the untold history of this important person that changed the life. Or you thought you knew Abraham Lincoln? Well, guess what? He's a tyrant. And so right now, I think is a good movement to kind of reevaluate what we have learned from our days of old, and as we continue to build up the next generation of our families, of Christians, and hopefully through podcasts like yours, that we can kind of have a fuller understanding that not all the good guys are bad, or not all the good guys are fully good, and not all the bad guys are fully bad. And also, sometimes it's hard to distinguish in the moment or in history, where that fault lies between the two.